I'm thinking since the recording started, we should go ahead, Tremaine.
Um,
I'm not sure.
Cassandra, are you the moderator or are we waiting?
I was just about to say, if you guys are ready to go ahead and get started, we can go ahead and get started.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
So my name is Cassandra Stewart. I'm one of the department managers for the Counselor Education Department here at the Chicago School. And presenting today, we have Tremaine Leslie and Hilda George.
Actually, there are four of us on the presentation. I think there's some mess up with the names. Shuan Su is also one of our presenters. So I think her name was added to the later schedule.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yep, I think we have a couple more people trickling in, but I think we are okay to go ahead and get started.
All right, awesome. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And so here we go. All right, so hello, everyone. Thank you guys for joining our presentation today. We're thrilled that you chose to hang out with us for the next hour as we talk about international students of color, our experiences here in the United States kind of collectively, and just some research that we've put together. And we're just pretty interested in pursuing this as a study and to highlight some of the issues that we face and challenges as international students navigating higher education in the United States. I'm Dr. Tremaine Leslie. Presenting with me is Shuan Su, which is one of my doctoral students, actually, and also Hilda George is also a doctoral student. We have another doctoral student, Smruti, who was not able to join us today, but the three of us will cover the content, and hopefully you would have gained some new insights from our presentation today. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to put those in the chat as we go along. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end where we can answer some questions if you have any of those. And so here we go. So let me maximize the screen. And Shuan will open us up with our first few slides, if the screen would cooperate. All right, so there we go.
Well, thank you, Dr. Leslie, and thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Shu Han, and I'm a clinical therapist at Linden Oaks Hospital in Illinois. And it's good to have you join us. Today we are focusing on international students. I was an international student probably like 30 years ago, and they particularly have mental health needs. And so we focus on international students of color who, come all the way over the world to come here to seek, higher education, and it's in their individual or collective journeys. And that's why it's very important for us to understand them. This is part of the multiculturalism that, as part of the counselor competency, and also kind of understand what their unique needs, what their challenges are, and how to help them. And I think this presentation is hopefully will influence and facilitate with some changes and environmental support for their advocacy. And so after this presentation, you would have better understanding about how their educational experience are, and then you would also be able to describe the impact of international student of color in their what their mental health impact. And you also will discuss the ways in which the institution and educational institute can kind of accommodate them and make their experience more meaningful and helpful.
All right, so I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm gonna pull up the video separately because sometimes it's a little wonky when we share from here. But this is, as you watch this video, if there are any thoughts or feelings or anything that comes up for you as you're looking at the video, feel free to jot those in the chat. And even after the video, as Shuan leads the discussion after that, you can also feel free to unmute if you have something that you want to share or add to the conversation. So let me see if I can get to the video. My computer is a little bit laggy, so please bear with me. Here we go. All right, skip. Are you guys able to hear it? Can you hear the video?
I cannot hear the video. No.
Let me stop here. Yeah, figure out what's wrong.
It was about to come out, so I heard a little bit, so try it again.
Okay. Let's do that. Hilda,
Yes.
can you go ahead and pull up if you have your stuff, because my computer is just moving a little bit kind of slow. If you can pull it up, let me stop. Can you
Okay.
share, please?
Let me just get the
Let me be direct. You're doing TV wrong.
let me see.
I hear something, but not
yes,
sure.
yes. Let me share my screen. Share my screen. Can you see?
Nice. Yes. And did you share your sound? Did you optimize the sound and the video? We're not getting any sound. I'm not hearing anything. Maybe that's why.
Is anybody hearing any song?
I'm not.
No. Okay.
Stop sharing and optimize. See if you can check the boxes to optimize the sound and the video. That should work.
Let me try, I can share.
Right now I'm confused.
Can you hear it?
Not yet, no.
Just to chime in, I'm not sure if anyone is hearing any sound, but from what I've done a quick little research, when you share the screen, there should be a little box in the bottom left-hand corner before you say okay that says share sound. So maybe if we sort of reshare screen and look for that, maybe that would help.
Thank you.
We can hear it.
Thank you.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and see if I can reshare the slides. And so as you looked at that video, just kind of think about, you know, whatever kind of came up for you as you were watching this international students experience. So trying to share.
Yeah, just wonder what are your reactions to the video? Like anyone would like to share?
I don't mind speaking. It was interesting to watch because I am an American and a Canadian, and I noticed there was Canadian money in the video. And I remember what it felt like to immigrate and come up to Canada from the States and go back and forth every week, and what it was like to come because of someone's international student status, and how lonely it can be and how encouraging it can be, going in either direction. So it was interesting to see the Canadian money in this video as I am preparing to go back to the US again today. So it was interesting.
Well, thank you. That definitely, I was wondering what kind of money was it? So thank you
Canadian.
for noticing that. Yes. And even like cross the border could be challenging, you know, even with similar language, but still very challenging with the loneliness, is right? Like, or need to rebuild that support, or like what was kind of difficult for you?
Yeah, thank goodness for me, moving was only a 4-hour distance between Ontario and Ohio. So I get to go back much more frequently than many people get to go back and forth, but still the experience of being an immigrant is real. And that process of being poked and prodded to get green, well, in the US would be green card status, or become a citizen, was challenging. And to navigate 2 different educational systems and to watch people go through that experience, it was definitely challenging. Still is.
Yes, thank you for sharing. I thought that was very valid. You know, and I'm glad that you got through some of it. Are you still in the middle of it, or?
Can you hear me?
No, yes, I can.
Am I still in it? My daughter is now a university student, so it's a little bit different for her because she got here when she was 5. So she is, I guess, as Canadian as she is American, but I'm still watching her navigate some things, and every once in a while there are some national differences that show up. So it's a little bit easier now. I've been here for a while.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else has a reaction or like noticeable things that, you know, in the video that you would like to share?
If not, you know, we can move on. And if you have anything that come up, you know, as we go along, you can just drop it in the chat just for the sake of time, so we can get going.
Yeah, so hopefully you get some sense of, after watching this video, it seemed like at the beginning it was kind of lonely and by oneself. And then I think he slowly built something, and then he started playing with a couple similar friends, and then maybe started working or having expanded that support. So the background for international students are those people who enrolled in accredited degree-granted higher education institution in the United States. And so this could, this can be like in-person students, or sometimes they are taking online courses from abroad. So that's the technical definition for international students of race. And it's a term used for students identified as Black, Latino, Asian, Middle Eastern, Pacific Islander, and multicultural individuals, because nowadays it can be very blended. The next slide. Oh,
Yeah, my stuff is just skipping all over the place for some reason. Hilda, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I was saying, as Shuhan said originally, international students come from all over the world. According to the Institute of International Education, they come from over 200 countries, or from all parts of the world. But the majority, 53% of international students of color comes from China, Korea, and India. And of course, we have some coming from Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and the Sub-Saharan regions, which means that 80% of international students studying in the US are students of color. 80% and 5% international students make up 5% of higher education student body. And so 80% of that are international students of color. Next slide. Okay, so currently there are over, can you go to slide 8, please? So currently there are over 900,000 students, international students enrolled in the US, and this is a drop from pre-pandemic of 1.1 million international students. As we know, the COVID pandemic, the racial pandemic, the political rhetoric of the times impacted students wanting to come to the US. So we can see some upward trend happening right now, but it is below the 1.1 million we had the 2019-2020 academic year. Next slide. Next. Okay, so we have students at all academic levels, international students of color coming from across the globe. They come as undergraduate students, graduate students, and even non-degree seeking students. And we have some students as well, over 200,000 international students pursuing OPT at this point. The majority of the students enrolled in higher education, they are undergrads, followed by graduate students and then non-degree. OPT is as a result of completion of your degree, and you want to get academic training, you want to get training per your degree before you move on in your academic journey or go back home. Okay, international students of color, we already said that they make up 80% of the population, and international students of color, as we said, make up 80% of the international student population, and they are a precious commodity. And why are they a precious commodity? A variety of reasons. You know, they contribute to a distinctive and colorful chapter of the history of American higher education. Since they come from diverse countries, diverse cultures, ethnicities, language, political views, and of course, educational background. They are considered rich natural resources for developing global competency in the US in higher education. They provide the US campuses with a finer understanding of the world and its culture. Of course, they often serve as ambassadors for American values, democracy, and the free market. So it is important to maintain international diversity on the US campuses because it is critical to the success of American colleges and universities. So since international students are central to the free flow of ideas, of course, which they take back to their country, if they could go back to their country, free flow of innovation, economic prosperity, and peaceful relations between nations. What's happening? The education of foreign-born students and the collaboration between American students and foreign-born scholars present the United States with an opportunity to promote the ideals that together make up the social, political, and cultural fabric of the United States. But despite these attributes of international students of color, they are an undervalued commodity. There is considerable investment and effort devoted to attracting international students to US institutions of higher learning. But however, once the students arrive in this country, the attention, the sought after, the high sought after attention that they had, it wanes. It wanes upon arrival in the host country, because students are being viewed now as responsible for their cultural and academic adaptation, and they are under constant pressure to acculturate. The difficulties experienced by international students negatively impact their educational journey, their professional and personal development, essentially their overall well-being. Next slide. So international students of color struggle to be appreciated for the economic contributions and valuable talents they bring to the US institutions of higher learning, resulting in students concluding that they are simply commodities and are the ones who generate the institution's revenue. International students of color are essential revenue stream to US universities and economy. And why do we say that? Because the most tangible benefit of international students is in the US has been their contributions to the US economy. These students are the largest funding source for international higher professional development. These students, they bring in, as our title said, about $45 billion a year to the US economy. And they pay for their tuition, which is about 3 times the amount of domestic students. They subsidize US citizens' education. They sorry, just having some issues there. They contribute to the economy through the creation of jobs. They help support academic and research missions of many of the institutions. They stimulate local economies and state economies as well. International students face a number of challenges, both academic and non-academic. And some of the academic challenges they face include difficulties of linguistics, difficulties adjusting to the new university system. Their credibility is questioned. They have difficulty adjusting to the very interactive, participatory and competitive American classroom methods. They fear being seen as a failure, which means if they fail, they have to return home. That is problematic. There's even the assumption that the international students' education doesn't align with the requirements of higher education in the US. So they face myriad academic challenges. The non-academic challenges include cultural differences, of course, culture shock, cultural misunderstandings. They have issues with social interaction. They have personal adjustment issues. They experience spirit murdering, which come about as a result of racism, nativism, racial schism, essentialism, discrimination. They experience other stressors like socio-cultural stressors, theoretical and practical stressors, and so many different stressors that I can name, but too much for this platform. They experience anti-immigration hostility or bureaucratic roadblocks, and we saw the worst of that during the Trump administration. So international students suffer a lot, essentially.
All right. So just to build on what my colleagues have been talking about, the international experience. So you should be kind of getting a good picture of how difficult, how challenging it is to pretty much leave one's home country to come to another space, to seek out education, to kind of add that value to oneself, right? And oftentimes it is such a misunderstood process. And when we oftentimes kind of talk about our struggles or talk about our collective experiences or individual experiences, the question is usually, okay, then why come, right? And it's not as simple as just kind of why come, right? Because if we were to abort every mission that presented some degree of challenge or struggle, then we probably still would be living in slavery. We still would have so many oppressive systems in place, right? And so instead of asking, why come, then, how about, collectively having conversations about reducing these barriers and make it a little bit easier for us to kind of exist together, coexist together in spaces where we can learn and benefit from each other's culture, right? So as Hilda mentioned, about that $45 billion, right? And so that was pre-pandemic. That amount, I guess, kind of dropped a little bit because as the pandemic kind of came full force in 2020, I think that's when people started to recognize or even understand what it meant to be an international student in the United States. As the pandemic came on board and nobody kind of knew what was happening, nobody knew what to do. It was a novel experience for all of us. The first decision that was made by Immigration Services and Homeland Security was to basically say to international students, pack up, go home. Now, think about people who have been here for a number of years. This has been home, right? Because as we're studying, we've kind of established a home base, right? Because we have to live somewhere, we have to get around, right? So you're now either renting property, you have maybe purchased a motor vehicle, you have been kind of holding down a job to sustain yourself. So all of these factors are in play, right? So when you say to someone, you have just a few days to pack up and go home, you have to understand that home has not been home for a long time for some people. And even if it has not been a long time, home has just not been home, right? Because some people have put caveats in place to be here for a while and without any consideration to say to a group of people, go home. That was just probably one of the most insensitive things that you could think that you could do to a group of people collectively. It kind of created this nationwide panic because people didn't know what to do. People were falling into deep depression. It was hard enough that a pandemic was in full force and we didn't know what to do. And so now you're saying, go home. There were people that their home base, whatever home base was, their borders were closed. There wasn't, there wasn't any kind of flight in or out. So it was just a very panicky kind of situation. And so thanks to MIT and Harvard, so they led the charge in bringing a lawsuit against ICE, which I guess ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and also Homeland Security. And about 200 other universities got on board and supported them in that lawsuit. And thankfully, that really helped to stabilize international students in the country for a while, because it would have been just such a chaotic pandemonium if people had to just up and leave. And then there was no hope for the future, because once you interrupt your study process, then it is very difficult to come back into the country to complete that. And we couldn't, essentially complete it from abroad, because people live in places where there might not be good access to internet, right? People live in different parts of the world where we have huge time differences, right? So typically when it would be class time in the US, it probably would have been in the wee hours of the morning in different parts of the world where people are from. And so none of that stuff was taken into consideration, of course. And so again, hence the fact that we're seen as commodities, right? So bring, yourself, bring your resources, fund our systems, but when we don't need you, we can toss you out, sort of thing. So that's kind of what that felt like when that decision was taken, right? So as we think about just these different sources of stress, so that was one major source of stress that happened, right? So in addition to other everyday stressors that international students go through, so again, we have to think about the demands of cultural adjustment, right? The academic piece of it, right? Interpersonal, financial, issues. All of these collective issues oftentimes take a toll on an individual's mental well-being, right? So language barrier is also another piece, right? Because all of us are not from parts of the world where English is our first language. So think about people coming into this country where English is oftentimes not even their second language, right? Because in my experience, I've taught students. I remember having a couple of students in my experience so far that I had one guy, and English was literally about the fifth language that he spoke. You know what I'm saying? So yes, and so just think about that richness of culture that someone is bringing into a space. And sometimes the only thing that they can hear from domestic students is like, speak English. Why are you here if you don't know how to speak English? That in and of itself is pretty ignorant, right? Because I would be so impressed by someone if I'm so impressed by people who speak 2 languages, right? So think about someone who's speaking upwards of 5, 6, 7 languages. They're from areas where there are lots of languages and dialects, and they're fluent in all of these things, and they come to a country where English is predominant. That's not on the top end of their speak, but they're here to pursue an advanced degree in a language that is not even their mother tongue. That's not even, that is impressive in and of itself. So we should actually be so much more impressed by that and, kind of learn from that instead of trying to create more oppressive type situations. So Americans often assume that everyone readily understands the English language and that some international student, again, like I was saying, it's way down the line for them in terms of the languages that they speak. So again, operating in that language that is not familiar, I just imagine how stressful that can be for someone. You're sitting in a classroom, right? And then you're having to listen to a lecture, you're having to participate in discussions. You already have so much self-doubt. You're so self-conscious, so self-aware, because you have an accent for one. Your language is a little bit different. And so you're worried about how you're going to be viewed when you speak. So there's just so much that rides on being an international student in this space, right? So that language barrier, it has direct negative implications for academic performance. And again, in our case, it can be challenging for establishing rapport, especially even if you're seeking counseling. It's hard because, again, our emotional language is that first language that we're used to, and that's what we're used to kind of expressing any depth of emotion and stuff. And so you go sit in front of someone, you don't even know how to kind of say how you feel for them to understand that. So that's an additional stressor as well. Right? So when we think about manifestation of symptoms, right? The adjustment of stress in the foreign environment, it manifests just in a myriad of ways, right? So physical tension increase, that causes an increase in blood pressure, right? In heart and pulse rate, it heightens susceptibility of illness and impairment to immune system. And these are just some of the few things that happen, right? And then you think about all of the cortisol that builds up when you're experiencing kind of all of these negative emotions, and that kind of dangerous hormone kind of builds up. And what do you do with that? There's not much to do with it, right? Then the cognitive fatigue results from information overload, because now you're in this new environment, you're learning all of these new skills. I remember coming here, and one of the first classes I had to take was political science. I had to take political science, and that was such a stressful experience for me, because you're taking, like, I got here and the very first semester, I'm taking political science. I'm from a country where I was not in tune to the political landscape of the United States, right? So now I'm having to know about all these things that are happening in the political realm, the history of politics here, and adapting to that and knowing that and reading books and taking tests and listening to the news and making sense. Who's the mayor of this town? Who is the governor? I'm not from a space where our political system is even set up in that way, right? So it was such a huge adjustment to put all of those pieces in place. And class for me became such a stressor. Every single day I was supposed to go to class, I had this anxiety, just reaction in my tummy. It was like this heaviness in my tummy, like it literally hurt every single day when I thought about going to class, because sitting in that space where I was so alone. And on top of that, I was the only Black student. I was the only person of color that was in that classroom. And so I became, I think, more of a bit of curiosity, Because then if you did say anything, instead of people paying attention to what you have to say or what you have to contribute, now they're fascinated by your accent and they want to know, now, where are you from? And you sound different. I know, I've been sounding like this my entire life, right? But you become this kind of bit of curiosity. And so sometimes if we're not careful, people really don't take us seriously because they hear an accent and they're just curious. And I'm not, mad at curiosity. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be curious, but not curious in a way as if like you're petting somebody's puppy. You know what I'm saying? Not that kind of, oh, like, oh, that's so cute, you have an accent. No, I'm an adult. So no, that's not okay. So we have to be able to understand that, our approach and how we see people and view people and how we help them, to kind of navigate this landscape. And even if you're here, and I don't know if there's anybody in our audience that is an instructor or, professor, it is so important to be aware of students, right? When you have an international student, how do you create space for that student, right? How do you add grace to them, give them grace with their work? Because if they're struggling, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're stupid or they don't have a right to be there. They're struggling simply because of that adjustment piece, right? That's what causes the struggle, that acculturative stress, right? Adjusting, when you're from culturally distinctive groups, right? And then you come in contact with another culture, that causes that acculturative stress. And that sometimes is so overwhelming for international students. Right. So it happens when we, before we come to the United States sometimes, and we've all, you watch television and sometimes the bits of the United States you see, it's like the land of opportunity and everything is so great. And we're looking, for this wonderful, just experience. And it seems like all just flowers and, sunshine and all of it. And as you saw in that video, for some of us, it's furthest from the truth, right? You kind of walk into this space and it's hard. And sometimes it's the hardest thing some people will ever do because you're from cultures, and don't assume that people come here because they're poor and they're from places where they're, it's so hard for them. No, they're people who are pretty established, well established in their home country, but they're just here to get a different shot at education. That's all. Right. So it's not that everybody's here looking for something or looking to take from any systems or anything like that. Right. So again, so when we're looking at these, issues that international students face, it leads to when we think about the underutilization of mental health services. Again, we're from culture sometimes where that's not even a part of our cultural structure, that mental health piece. So we're not thinking about, oh man, I need to go see a counselor or talk to somebody about my feelings. We're looking at a situation where we're from collectivist culture. And when you have issues, you bring that to the collective. You work that out in your family. You don't tell your family business to strangers, type of thing, right? So there are different cultural pieces that we also have to understand as to why sometimes people underutilize, these different services, right? So there's so many pieces that kind of go into, us being here and struggling, right? So then accommodation from the US higher education system, they need to modify that, right? Sometimes as we come, you get that little tour around campus that first day, and then that's it. So sometimes we don't even know where to find stuff, or, you get a map. We've never read a map before and try to locate a building type of thing. You hear that there's a counseling center. And again, that really means nothing for people who are not accustomed to that. So how can we, modify these accommodations so students can navigate these spaces a little bit better, right? Some of these services can be better advertised, and so just more involvement in the international student orientation and creating just this narrative that disarms help seeking. So it's just a lot for us to navigate the space and to be here in this country, right? So again, like, we noted earlier, so this is pretty much like an ongoing research project. And so these are a couple of questions that underpins what we kind of intend to do, right? This is how we propose to collect data. So international students, we're thinking about, using that stratified purposive sampling, and then using some semi-structured interviews and questionnaires to collect data from international students, basically to kind of see what their experiences are. And then we're going to use as our or model the interpretive phenomenological analysis, and we'll be using that, right? With all of that information, so just a few questions for engagement, for that engagement piece. And actually, let's jump to, if we could jump to the summary, just kind of summarize, and then we'll come back and see, you know, we can use this to kind of wrap out for the few minutes that we have left. All right, so we just go to summary. So Hilda, if you wanna, you know, kind of take that, and then we'll come back.
So of course, the United States has long been the top receiving country for international students of color. Everybody wants to come to the United States. From the time we were born as international students, what we see on television, the books that we read, everything we interact with is informed by stuff coming out from the US. So we want to come to the United States to seek an advanced degree. So because of the value of the advanced degree on the world market and access to job opportunities in the United States after graduations. So of course, for these reasons, the United States maintains its supremacy in international exchange. So it is in the best interest of the United States to continue to recruit and enroll international students of color, since they are the majority international student population, as a way to help keep its power within the global destinations ranking. Interest convergence arguments dehumanize international constituents by conceptualizing them as resources for accomplishing a goal rather than members of the institutional community worthy of basic rights and support.
Right. So again, you know, so interest groups are fighting for and with international students, and we're really grateful for people who see us, right? When we feel seen, that's a basic human right, just to be seen and to feel acknowledged. And so that's wonderful for people who come alongside us and, you know, kind of fight that fight. Although sometimes you kind of wonder, because sometimes when I even think about, you know, MIT and Harvard kind of leading that charge to fight for us in that pandemic, you know, I look at it as a kind of double-edged thing, because they would have had a lot to lose. A lot of these universities that came on board, if we were all, you know, on the next flight home and whatever that looked like, it would cause chaos. And I think the chaos wouldn't have been apparent until we would have left, right? Or international students at a point would have left, right? So again, grateful for interest groups and for people who are understanding, learning, and you know, supporting in all the best ways that they can. And again, international students, they become commodities that can generate diversity, contribute to foreign policy, and engage in knowledge production, and to support the US economy. And we've been doing that. And so again, to see that, but also to see us as people. We're humans, you know, we're people deserving of, you know, just any kind of rights. And I know, you know, immigrant and immigration is such a buzzword, and I've kind of heard so much negative rhetoric, even in my presence sometimes. And, you know, people will say just horrible things and then say, oh, but you're different, you know? And, you know, I'll say that's not the compliment you think that is, right? Because that's not a compliment to disparage a group and then to single out someone and say you're different. That's absolutely not complimentary, by the way, right? So when we hear and experience those microaggressions, we have to be able to kind of sometimes call them out, because sometimes I think people operate from that standpoint that they know, from the knowledge that they have. And so sometimes, again, we educate, but again, educating is so tiresome, and we don't always want to be educating people. So I think sometimes we have to take that charge to learn, and to learn to treat people well, right? See people first and treat people well. So just kind of to hop, I looked in the chat a little bit, and I saw that there were a few comments in the chat. So we want to just kind of address those with the few couple minutes that we have left. So Tiffany noted that she's a professor, administrator, racial minority in her country of birth, an immigrant, multilingual, and experienced both sides of many of the circumstances presented. So see what I'm saying? So even people that are nationals experience that. Thank you for sharing that, Tiffany. So just imagine people who are not, you know, from here. So we get it like very harshly sometimes. Let me see if I can get one more. And so Elizabeth says, as a lecturer, she struggles with protecting marginalized students from microaggressions and other inappropriate behaviors, versus infantilizing based on only on being a student of color. Absolutely. It's such a very, very delicate line to draw, to do that. But again, as you get to know people for who they are as people first, then I think that helps to develop that relationship so much, better. So thank you guys for, dropping those little nuggets there. And I really do hope for, the others that you were able to just garner a little bit of information. And if you have international students as colleagues, as, classmates, as students, I hope, you can walk away being able to think about how you can be very intentional about treating them, well, and treating them differently, checking in on them even. All right, so any final thoughts? Any ladies have any final thoughts before our time fully expires?
Yeah, I want to add a little bit about, I do see international students in the clinical setting, meaning sometimes it's so difficult with the adjustment disorder, without getting enough support. They showed up in the hospital setting or, that needing more intensive treatment. And I think that was good. At least they are getting the treatment. But I do think the language barrier is one of the, potential, and then they want to be accepted and connected still with their community. So again, I sometimes give them referrals, try to help them to feel more accepted and more familiar with the setting in the US. And I don't know if anyone have experience with that, or, even like counseling clients that's international student that may also kind of be part of this, kind of helping them to feel more integrated in the US society.
Any final thoughts from anyone? So Lorraine, Lorraine shared that she concurred and with the statements made. Thank you, Lorraine, and thanks to everybody who is actually trying to make a difference and just kind of doing their best to see people as people. And we're in that profession where we need to see people and we need to learn to see people. So thank you guys so much for all of those who shared in the chat. All right, so we're gonna stop sharing for a little bit. And I think this brings us almost close to time. I think